Islam in everything but name. So culturally, they're indistinguishable. Like they wear the clothes that the Muslims wear, they speak their language, and so on. So even he says, even if they aren't Muslim, even if they don't believe in these things, they're still kind of giving over. So he's shocked at these things, and basically what he wants to do is cultivate in his audience a sense of radical difference with the Muslim other. So he says the proper Christian attitude is revulsion for Muslims, revulsion at Muslim bodies, at Muslim practices, and so on. And so in his tracts, in his polemics, he basically constantly depicts the Prophet ﷺ and his followers as thoroughly fleshly beings. He says if Christianity is the domain of the spirit, these Muslims in their practices, they're basically devoted to the flesh. So in his treatise, in this concerning the Muhammadan sect, he says he includes a biography of the Prophet. That's rather unflattering biography, and includes a description of the main tenets. And he says that the Quran is a besmattering of fables, lies, vanities, contradictions, jokes, heresy, stupidity, insults to God, and shenanigans. While the Prophet himself was possessed by demons and a sly scoundrel born on an evil day whose ruses have duped the credulous masses. He says that Ishmael was a wild ass, his bloodthirsty descendants, that's a reference to Genesis, his bloodthirsty descendants, that is Muslims, have inherited his nature to be beasts of the field. And that's a reference to Isaiah. They also maintain this hatred for the legitimate descendants of Abraham, i.e., Israelites, not the Jews, but the Christians, because the Israelites themselves were not legitimate. And he says that this enmity is analogous to that of demons against the sons of Adam and Eve, that the one that Muslims have toward Christians. And it's harbored not against contemporary Israelites, but is redirected toward Christians, the true spiritual descendants of Isaac. So how is this related to the topic? Basically, I'm just trying to give you a flavor of the kind of things that or his position. You can kind of glean his general outlook from that. So the way that this factors in directly to the topic, though, is he says that the Moors like the Muslims, are naturally libidinous, violent, and stupid. In these things, they're more of a beast than a beast. Their bestiality is evident in their lust and in that of their Prophet. But, he says, it's not only their sexual proclivities that make these men carnal creatures, it is this is the point, it is their ridiculous and depraved law that, in its utter carnality, demonstrates their fleshly nature. So, the law of Islam is irrational. It gives free rein to their animal desires, and in their Ishmaelite nature, it makes them the implacable enemies of Christians. And finally, according to Pedro, their very sacraments, like those of the Jews, are carnal, in stark contrast with the spiritual and timeless sacraments of the Christians. So, if we can kind of draw a binary opposition, according to him, according to this medieval Christian polemicist, you've got irrational law of the Muslims versus the rational law of the Christians. You've got the bestial nature of the Muslims versus the uplifted nature of the Christians. You've got the timeless and spiritual sacraments of the Christians against what he says, the filthy and bloody sacraments of the Muslims. One example of this is in a time when Christian Europe didn't believe in washing, for instance, right? So he says that flesh-bound Muslims believe that by washing their bodies before praying, they can purify themselves, whereas this is in their delusion. They should rather perform an interior cleansing in their hearts, right? So, but this is really interesting because he's saying outward cleansing doesn't actually cleanse you, right? You think that when you take up water and you wash your hands and your, in your mouth and your nose and your face and so on, you're actually washing your hands and your mouth and your face and so on. But you're actually not. That's only the illusion. What you should be doing is taking up the spiritual sacraments and rituals of the Christians, which wash you on the inside instead of the outside. You're mistaking the outside for the inside. You're pretending, your understanding is so limited that you think that by doing something externally, it'll affect you internally, whereas that isn't the case. So, again, it's a problem of interpretation. you're confusing the outside for the inside. So that's Pedro Saab's position. So from contemporary times, when I mentioned the Rand Corporation earlier, I jumped back to 1575. I'm going to jump back like 1535 years or so earlier, and say that this concern with Muslim carnality also reflects continuities with those of St. Paul's position. Again, this idea of inside and outside is basically taken up from St. Paul as well. Now, we know that Paul himself his name initially was Saul, and he was a strict persecutor of the Christians, and then he was traveling on the road to Damascus, and he saw a light, and he heard a voice, and he was blinded, and he fell to the ground, and he rose up, and then his name was Paul, and he was a fervent defender of Christianity. This was his conversion on the road to Damascus. And then he became one of the fervent promulgators of Christianity. He wrote lots of letters to different Christian communities, and those are some of the earliest authentic documents that we have that are rigorously established historically and so on, that these are definitively Pauline Christian documents. In his one of the things that he is again very strict about is this distinction between inside and outside. So I'm going to return to that. But first, Christianity itself, if it's growing out of Judaism, it begins as a movement among Jews. It's centered on ideas of redemption and election that were part of Judaism. And so all of the emergent Christian ideas that were coming about were shaped by this tension of the church claiming itself as true Israel, and then the fact that unfortunately there were all these historical people who thought of themselves as true Israel and were Christians. They didn't follow the church. And so the desire to become fully Christian could be fulfilled only by erasing the Jewish trace from itself. Right? For Christianity to be fully Christian, it had to take on the vocabulary, the ideas, or many of the ideas, and basically the whole framework that it inherited from Judaism, except then erase Jews, like real Jews, from that in order to make itself fully Christian. And so for Christianity in medieval Western Christendom, Jews were never either quite dead nor quite external. They had to accept that a certain Jewish framework in order for Christianity to become intelligible, but at the same time, it couldn't admit the validity of Jewish thought either. And so there was this difference that was it was hanging on, despite